Hello and welcome to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Monday, February 26th, 2024. That means it's the 57th day of ranking my favorite video games through each day of the year. Coming in at number 310 is Final Fantasy II. As you'll discover throughout the rest of the year, the Final Fantasy franchise is very near and dear to my heart. I have a spreadsheet containing the rankings for the whole year, and if I press Ctrl F to search it and type Final Fantasy, there are, 21 results. While Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories was the first game in the countdown to technically have Final Fantasy characters, Final Fantasy II is the first game proper from the franchise. Well, that does mean it's my least favorite, at least of the ones that I've played and made the cut. It has a lot going for it. Before jumping into stuff, I should mention for people wondering how this game from 1988 looks so good, it's because I'm playing the Pixel Remaster version of the game, which is by far the best way to play it. More on that later. Final Fantasy II was a very interesting experiment and learning process for Square, allowing them to see what exactly made the first game of the franchise so successful. It retained a lot of core elements that go on to define the franchise, such as the combat system, fantasy aesthetic, and absolutely brilliant music from Nobuo Uematsu. The writing finds a strong balance between serious and whimsical, and tells a cohesive, easy-to-follow story. That being said, it took some risks that I think didn't quite pan out, and the lack of these elements in future titles tells me that I'm not the only one that thinks so. Biggest change is leveling. They removed the job system from the first title and instead implemented a dynamic skill level system, not unlike the one I praised Quest 64 for having. The key difference that made it work in Quest 64 compared to here is that in that game, you're playing as a silent protagonist and you really are meant to be that character. In most Final Fantasy games, one of their biggest strengths is a strongly defined cast of characters. Being able to mold any character into more or less any archetype takes away from one of the strongest points of the narrative and makes the characters feel less interesting. Even in the games that have the job system, which is a defining feature of the franchise, you still have to narrow in on different strengths and weaknesses. In Final Fantasy II's system, however, every character can grow to just be a muddled mess of varying degrees of strong that makes them feel all very much the same. This system is also mechanically problematic for spell levels. In most games in the series, you simply learn more powerful versions of the spells. For example, Cure might become Cura and then Curaga. Each iteration is more powerful than the last, but at a greater MP or magic point cost. However, you don't lose access to the weaker versions, giving you the flexibility to conserve your MP when needed. In Final Fantasy II, that system doesn't exist, instead leveling up spells as you continue to use them, making them more potent but also more expensive. This can make MP conservation rather difficult for your spellcasters, though there are some less obvious ways around it as you get later into the game. My last major gripe with the game certainly isn't unique to it, as it was fairly ubiquitous with JRPGs of that time period, but it felt especially glaring in Final Fantasy II. The issue I'm talking about is the difficulty curve. It should be expected with these games to have a lot of grinding when there's sudden jumps in enemy strength, but what Final Fantasy II does a pretty poor job of making clear is when you're not supposed to fight something at all. There are lots of opportunities throughout the game to be just a few steps off the correct path, and then suddenly you're fighting enemies that you're not meant to be ready for until way later in the game. You can save in the overworld, so as long as you do that frequently, it's more of an annoyance than an actual problem, but it would be nice if we could have just avoided the issue entirely. It's not all bad news though. The second installment to the franchise did establish some massive pillars, most notably Chocobos and Cid, both of which have been included in literally every mainline game in the franchise ever since, and most of the spin-off games as well. As for Chocobos, we even got the theme music right off the bat. Speaking of music, there's a ton of upgrades to be had with the Pixel Remaster edition of the game. The sprites are clearer, with better colors, and the game is supported at a very high resolution. The music includes a full orchestral arrangement for the whole game, and very notably, you have the option of toggling off random encounters. This saves a lot of time and headache with all the backtracking you do to various cities throughout the story. If you want to play a more pure version of the game, that's no issue, as you can toggle off all of the visual and audio upgrades to get the original version of the game too. On top of lots of quality of life stuff, the game also comes with a full bestiary, showing lots of info of enemies you've already encountered, and even the ability to create custom fights with the characters for your current party to face, allowing you the option to brew your own challenges. Lastly, there's a full concept art gallery, chock full of amazing pieces by one of my all-time favorite artists, Yoshitaka Amano. Back when this game came out, there was obviously only so much the game's graphics could tell you about the characters, so the concept art was critical to selling both the world and the game itself to players. All in all, Final Fantasy II is a great game, but it's just one of the worst in a series full of great games, keeping it in the tail end of February on my rankings. That being said, I plan to do a re-ranking of the whole list in January 2025, after I've done this whole project getting a fresh look at each of these games, and the Pixel Remaster has likely raised my overall opinion of this title that showed a lot of age the last time I played it. Join me tomorrow as I talk about the 309th game on my list, where I go to space with Yuri Lowenthal.